Hello citizens, Councillor Gian-Carlo here, Ward 9 TV Light. Today we're talking about Bridgeland and a new proposal that's coming into the Bridgeland area called the BCCC. We're trying something new with the whiteboard. We'll see if this works. So it's the BCCC, and that stands for the Bridgeland Complex Care Center. Now, as you know, East Riverside is a part of Bridgeland that we've started to have a very thoughtful conversation regarding over the last couple of years. It's the institutional area of Riverside, just east of the bridges before 12th Street, sort of below Tom Campbell's Hill there. And it represents a landscape of institutional uses. A lot of seniors housing, affordable seniors housing. There's some city facilities, and there's a big chunk of Alberta Health Services land. And we started to have a conversation with these institutional users saying, you know, what you've done over the years is you've warehoused large vulnerable populations away from community with the idea that large economies of scale was the most cost-effective way to handle these populations. What we now know is that the best thing to do with seniors and people who have affordability needs and have issues like that is that we want to integrate them deeply into our communities rather than stigmatize them and push them out. And so the conversation has sort of been about how do we reintegrate these communities back into the fabric of the community of Bridgeland. The other thing that the idea behind these large institutional landscapes was that if you built large enough landscapes, you'd recognize economies of scale for housing seniors. And what we now realize is that these big, brooding institutional buildings are based on the idea that you're going to constantly receive an ever-increasing government paycheck, and that the age of that is going away. And so the institutions themselves, Silvera, Bishop O'Byrne, CNIB, they started to realize, you know, we're sitting here on these very valuable pieces of inner city land. We're not taking best care of our clients the way we now realize we have to. And the community of Bridgeland was saying, you know, where do we put density? Down by the river, down by the LRT station. How do we reconnect the community to the river, and how do we reconnect with these populations of neighbors who are disconnected from us? And so the East Riverside master planning process was born, and the idea is that we create a Bridges version 2.0, and while we can't bring seniors up the hill into the center of the community, we can bring the community down into the area. Now, as this was taking place, Alberta Health Services was looking around trying to figure out where do we create a complex care center for people who have significant issues and need to be housed in a complex care environment. And because their land in Bridgeland is close to the LRT, close to everything you'd want to be next to, easy to access for staff and stuff like that, they realized this is a very valuable piece of land. Now, the word came to us quite a while ago that there was going to be a significant investment in a complex care center in the Bridgeland area, and we started the conversation immediately, your community leaders, myself, with the provincial ministers, Associate Minister of Health, Minister of Infrastructure, saying, look, we understand that you want to make a significant investment in the East Riverside area, and we welcome that, but we want to make sure it's done in a way that achieves the objectives of deep integration that the East Riverside master planning process has sort of identified as best practices. And what I said to the ministers is, look, we could go business as usual. And business as usual is basically that you have a piece of land and you have a certain amount of money that you want to spend. In this case, we're talking about a $130 million government investment into the community of East Riverside. And left to a very conventional process, Alberta Health Services is going to build an institutional building sitting in the middle of parking lots and maybe some grassed landscapes. And we're going to say, no, we need to deeply engage the community on deep integration with the community. And they're going to sort of like turn around and say, well, you know, we could build it like that. And this is not acceptable. And what we said to the ministers is that, you know, what you could do on that same piece of land is you could realize that you're in an inner city environment with very valuable land. And this box could very easily sit in one corner, and you could spend your $130 million, but then with the rest of the land, you could recoup that investment by selling it to the private sector and continue to build out the East Riverside area. Good value for the taxpayer, great achievement of the intent of the East Riverside Master Plan. But there's even a better way to go. And what we said is, what you could do is you could go out to market and you could say, look, we're sitting on this beautiful piece of inner city land in a great neighborhood next to transit, and we could put that out to market and say, hey, who's interested in working with us to develop what we can on this land? Oh, on top of that, we have a $130 million anchor tenant. And what you would see is the same kind of interest in the Bridges parcels, but that much more enhanced, because having a $130 million anchor tenant backstopped by government dollars could mean that you could do something, beautifully, wonderfully integrated in here that includes seamlessly integrated the complex care system. I told the ministers, I know you're excited about option 3. We're excited about option 3. We're going to be dealing with a business as usual administration that's been putting these kinds of institutional buildings on landscapes for a long time, and we have to have a different kind of conversation with them. On March 5th, we started that conversation, and this was the direction we were heading in. This was the proposition we made, and right now we're engaged in that conversation. And I have a lot of faith that the government ministers understand that something on this side of the spectrum is way preferred to an old school approach. I think there was some uptake amongst the Alberta Health staff who are in charge of delivering the BCCC, but the question remains how this is going to play out. My position is that if we can't get somewhere in this spectrum, if we can't build a mixed-use program on that piece of land, then what we are going to do is we're going to say, if you have to build a standalone institution, then we want to swap land with you. And in the area that's currently housing the Crossbow site where this is proposed for, which is closer to the LRT, closer to Main Street, very close to the residential community that we want to protect the character of, we're going to say this is going to become more Bridges style development, and over here on the Christine Meikle site against Tom Campbell's Hill, in a much smarter place for just a standalone institution, that's where we want you to go. So our ideal plan is that Alberta Health Services is extremely interested in pursuing a mixed-use program. Our fallback position is that we move them to the Christine Meikle site and we pursue a Bridges-style development on the site that they were going to build on. I am hoping right now we go to this option. It's too soon to tell, but one of the things that I'm extremely focused on is that we make sure that that knife's edge that too often exists in government projects, where it's either too soon to tell or too late to do anything about it, that we actually have a broad plateau where we can have a very thoughtful conversation about the best possible outcomes. We've done everything to set up that conversation. We have support from government, and now we're going to see where the chips fall. Thank you so much for your interest, and we'll be giving you constant updates to see where this rolls out. Thank you. Gian-Carlo signing out.